Hello, everyone. Dr. Randall Bell back with Core IQ, where we're going to talk about life skills we all need. We need to know leadership, time management, goal setting, conflict resolution is a big, big topic, and we're going to tackle it right now. How do we work things out with people? And for that discussion, I have my buddy Danny Ray here. Danny, very accomplished. He's performed all over the world as a magician. That's where I met him, at the Magic Castle. But you do a lot of other interesting things where I bet you see some conflict. You tell us about other things you see.
Yeah, so I've been doing marriage counseling for the last 20 years.
There's no conflict there.
No, thankfully, my wife and I've never had a fight.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I hear you.
You guys haven't ever fought,
Never.
have you? Never. Yeah, so, yeah, anytime you have two people together, there's going to be conflict.
Yeah, well said. And, speaking of conflict, I do this prison volunteer work.
Yeah.
And I remember my very first time going to prison. I went to San Quentin prison, and I'm sitting there, and this guy's explaining the process of what landed him in prison.
Yeah.
And the basic story was he's growing up in this situation that wasn't so great. It was kind of humiliating and kind of embarrassing, a lot of shame. And instead of dealing with it, the conflict kept building up, and he kept real quiet about it.
Yeah.
Okay, even though on the outside everything was cool, inside he's like a volcano, the pressure.
Yeah.
And then came this thing, they call it a trigger. And I've heard words of trigger, or you get charged, where something happens where you just get that, kind of feeling, and your heart races. You can actually feel it. The blood pumps, the breathing starts, and you feel, charge. It's triggered. He said, I was triggered because a guy laughed at me, so I responded by killing him. Okay, that's a real story, and that really hit me in terms of, and now we're talking about conflict resolution. So how do we respond in a way where we don't get landed in prison, where things kind of go a little bit better? Yeah. So that's the conversation we want to have. Now, most of us don't get into that kind of situation or that kind of trouble, but we still have lots of conflict where we go off and we lose it. At least I do. I don't know if you probably don't.
Thankfully, I've been able to work on these things for years where I would say I haven't had rage since I was 19 years old. I can remember the last time I was really enraged. I've been angry, but there's a difference between that anger and letting that go to rage. I know the way I've talked to some different scientists about it, when we talk about like blowing our top, it's like, it's a real thing where you don't see correctly after that. It is blurry vision, quite literally, where you don't act or respond the way you normally would when you're clear thinking.
Yeah, and that is an actual physiological thing, because when we're triggered, we go into the flight, fright, or freeze mode. Yeah. And there's actually a pump of adrenaline into our bloodstream that is basically in our system by nature to protect ourselves or keep ourselves safe. So when all of the neurology and all the brain chemistry is focused on, fight or flight or freeze, it takes away the memory, and you're literally thinking differently at that moment. Yeah. So it's a very real thing.
And that affects any relationship you're in when you're at that moment where your lid's blown, you're done, is you're not going to respond correctly. And that's where sometimes leaving that situation is the healthiest thing to do.
Yeah. So we're talking about aggressive. This first one here, that's like over the top aggression. Yeah. And we've all seen it. Some of experienced. You had a last experience at age 19. Mine was maybe more like, 19 months ago, 19 minutes ago. No, but I mean, it does happen. It's happened in all of us, I think, if we're honest. I mean, go back to when you were 19. What did that feel like? Let's talk about that. And
it was horrible. It was the day I met my brother-in-law, and I was going to ask my wife to marry me the next day. Wow. So I was really excited about that. And my sister, 2:00 in the morning, wanted a ride over to her boyfriend's house at the time. I'm like, I'm not giving you a ride at 2:00 in the morning. And so eventually she talks me into it. I give her a ride and she leaves me. I'm just sitting in a car. There's no cell phones at this time, And so I'm waiting. She's like, I'll be back in 5 minutes. Well, she joined some party, and so she's at a party. So after like a half hour, I start looking for, where's my sister, And so, I was so furious that she would trick me into dropping her off at this party that she had no intention of leaving. She told me I just need to pick something up, and I was so furious. When I look back, it's silly over a little bit of time and over a relationship with my sister, how I could get so angry.
Yeah.
But I drove erratically. I was yelling at the top of my lungs at her when, she finally came out an hour plus later, and I realized at that point in my life, I never want to respond like that again. And so I made changes in my aggressive behavior to move hopefully towards these ones a little bit more.
I appreciate you sharing that. That's really, that's a great illustration of what this kind of looks like. Now, our next one is kind of assumptive. Assumptive, as I take it, kind of from the books, is you're assuming things, you're kind of quiet about it. You should be doing something. You're feeling it, but you're not dealing with it. I mean, have you had something you want to say about that?
Yeah, it's pretty classic for people to sweep things under the rug, to not talk about it, right. They're dealing with it. They might not explode, but inside they're saying things about the other person that are negative, that are spiteful, maybe not hateful, but in this can really over time lead to bitterness, and that bitterness will divide relationships.
The trigger happens, some people just kind of respond, and then that's where the volcano's building up and building up and building up, and you don't process it, and it just gets worse and worse, and you have kind of this internal turmoil going on.
Right. As you talk about things, there's healing in that confession. There's healing in that conversation of saying what's going on. Like as we isolate and we just say we could deal with it. I'm a man, or I'll figure it out on my own.
Right.
That could be very destructive to our health.
Over here in the yellow, we're kind of letting things, fester and, boil up inside of us. But when we kind of switch over to the green, a green is the agreeable. That's where you just kind of own it and say, you know what? I kind of made a mistake there. Maybe I did something a little sketchy I shouldn't have done, or maybe I did something inadvertently. I didn't mean to, but when it's called to my attention, I just kind of own it and say so. It's kind of interesting how things kind of are diffused when you do that.
Yeah, and diffusing conflict is a huge one in conflict management, conflict resolution. As we admit, we own our stuff, and this happened with my wife the other day, where something came up, and instead of like stewing about it and getting more upset about it, I just went, you know what? I just need to go admit I messed up, babe. Sorry about that. I blew it. And then we were able to move on quickly. And that's one of my big things with this is when my wife and I were first married, seems like the conflicts were long and intense. And now we bring them down, we're not as heated. We bring that side of it down and we shorten them up. And it makes for conflict a lot more manageable, a lot more freedom in it to be able to express ourselves, to be able to do it quickly. We know each other a lot better, but we realize it's not worth dragging out over a long time, and yelling about it isn't effective. So admitting, going like, look, I blew it, gets you a lot further than not owning your stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen relationships, maybe even been in them, where, you're in the doghouse for 2-3 days, and by the time you get out of the doghouse, there's another doghouse, where these things just go on. The thing I love about my wife is that we'll get into it, but it's over in 2 or 3 minutes. I mean, it's like we say what we want to say, and we're at that point where, it clears, the air is clear pretty quick. It's a great thing to kind of have that relationship. You say what you want.
You need forgiveness in there, as you guys are quick to move to forgiveness, where a lot of people are holding on to those things. They don't want to forgive, but forgiveness is it's what makes a relationship operate well.
Yeah, it sure does. Okay, so we've seen the aggressive, the explosion. We've talked about that. I think the big thing here with the trigger event, is to pay attention how we feel. If we feel our blood boiling, or that trigger, that conflict, we feel, just, you know what I mean? You just take a moment, because in those quick responses is where we get into trouble. If we kind of just take a moment a little bit before reacting, that can help a lot to avoid that and maybe avoid that, process it.
With any of these, my wife and I, what we try to do in terms of training and teaching, but things that we've learned along the way, is all of these things you could create images for in your own relationship. And so like that blowing the top, right, is we use that is instead of saying something, which sometimes it's difficult for us to get something out, is just to go like this, babe, like I'm just right here. I don't want to be here. This is where I am, but I won't say it, but she'll know just by going like this. You know,
you actually make like this is a symbol that I'm boiling up and stuff.
Yeah. And so sometimes it's harder to just express those things, and to just say, babe, I just need a minute, you know, like this is where I am. Allows her to know like, hey, I did something that really is upset. I didn't know that, you know, and so she might respond differently in terms of cooling me down, and then I might be able to get some time to reflect and think through how I really want to respond. Yeah, we have a bunch of these of like pebble versus boulder. Is sometimes one simple statement where you're about to blow, you think you're just dropping a pebble, like no big deal, and they're like, you just dropped this massive boulder. And so we would use that boulder, you know. And she's like, what did I say, you know, because in her mind she's dropping a pebble, and I'm like, no, this goes back to childhood. This goes back to abandonment issues I had as, you know, from my father, you know, all that stuff that is part of a relationship and the dynamic, but we don't realize sometimes we're saying something that we think is trivial and it's massive. Yeah. So I would definitely think through what are some things that you could say that would let them know this is bigger, or this is where I am. We have another one where we're closed off, you know. We don't use any of these really anymore, but early on in our marriage we did, is you have a hard day at work and you're like, I'm just closed off. So this isn't this one. It's just like I'm closed off. Like everybody's been on me at work and things are really tense right now. Give me some time to just like decompress from work before, you know, we, you know, catch up, hang out, you know. And so yeah, or you know, I'm open, let's have a hug, let's do something together. So,
and kind of communicate. And a couple things came to mind. This is the boulder, this could be the pebble, but it's in your shoe, so it's just a little thing, but it's kind of annoying step after step, you know, where it kind of builds up. Here we're kind of dealing with it. I mean, one thing I've noticed about, you know, conflict resolution is those people that can kind of talk about it, those relationships typically get better and better, and the ones that don't talk about it or talk about it in these explosive ways, they kind of disintegrate.
Yeah, and that is the key. You know, you hear about it all the time, is like communication's the key to any great relationship, but it's how do you communicate effectively, and how do you do that consistently, and how do you not avoid, because some people will just avoid conflict. Conflict's neutral. You know, it's not, sometimes we want to avoid it because we think it's negative, but great things can come out of conflict. And marriages get better because of conflict, but they could also take a turn because of conflict.
And also being aware of triggers, not just our own triggers, but triggers for others. Because if I know that my wife is triggered about something, you know, maybe it might be saying, hey, let's talk about, or just bringing up a topic, say, you know what, would it be okay if we discuss this issue a little bit? Because it might not be okay at that moment. So just asking permission before you get into something that you think might be triggering.
Which is great communication, is you're going there. There's a great book called 5 Love Languages. And we use this illustration all the time with people, is when you understand the other person's love language, you don't speak in your own, you speak in theirs. So for example, mine's physical touch. My wife's is like is words of affirmation. And so early on in our marriage, if we had a conflict, she would say sorry and I would give her a hug, and we both felt horrible because she needed to hear that I was sorry and I wanted the hug, you know, but I would give her the hug and, oh, it's okay, babe. She's like, I still feel horrible. Why doesn't you say sorry? But to me, that's my way of saying sorry, is I wanted the physical touch. And so what you said is like, we have to communicate the way they will hear it. So by going to your wife and asking for permission, saying, hey, would it be okay if we talked about this? You're not just going in like, hey, we need to talk about this, you know, and it could feel aggressive. You're assuming certain things, you know, and instead of like, where's she at and how can I approach her best?
So since this 5 love languages came up, let's just kind of quickly review them. There's gift giving, then we've got quality time,
Right.
and we got physical touch.
Acts of service.
Right. And then the last one is words of affirmation.
Yeah, words of affirmation.
Okay, so we get to the last one. It's assertive. That's where you kind of stand your ground. You may not be in agreement, but you need to kind of express where you're coming from at the same time, not turn it into a brouhaha, aggressive battle.
Right.
So that's probably of all these, this is the most tricky, because here you need to be assertive, but you don't want to, bury it. You don't want to be agreeable because you don't agree.
Right.
But you don't want to explode. This is the top of the Himalayas. This is the tricky ground here.
I think this is so essential for the times we live in, is we have vastly different views in America. Obviously, this will be seen internationally, but across the world, we have different views, and the idea that we need to be agreeable in every situation isn't realistic.
Right.
So whether it's a one-on-one relationship or whether we're looking at relationship with country, I had a friend of mine, he knew a coworker for a long time, and it came up that he voted for Trump. And the other person, like this coworker he's known for years, went, "Oh, so you're a racist." That shouldn't be. We should be able to have different political views, different theological views, different economic views, different views on how our society operates, and we should be able to go have a healthy relationship, not you have to agree with me or we're not gonna be able to get along. That's only gonna cause conflict if everybody has to agree with your position on everything.
Absolutely. And the thing is when looking at Washington, D.C., sometimes it's like the helicopters hovering over an episode of the Jerry Springer show. It's just on all sides. I'm not picking sides. It's just absolute a bunch of clowns, doing stupid stuff. But in regular life, we can't do that and live effectively. We got to have different points of view and discuss them.
Right.
And that's the thing I love about going into the homeless shelters or going into the jails or the prisons is I'm talking to people that have very different views, very different experiences. But part of the thing I had to do, I'm not agreeing with what they did. I don't think they agree with what they did, but I had to kind of stand my ground, at the same time be respectful and meet them where they are and just listen without blowing my top about what I'm hearing. So, and that was and it still is an effort to kind of be in that zone where I can listen to people that I don't agree with, but have a sensible conversation about it.
I think there's the key word, listen.
Yeah.
People don't want to listen to other people's view. It's just like they're waiting for that conversation to end so they can insert their view. Yeah. And then you wonder why people aren't agreeing. I think people are willing, when you listen to them, to really evaluate and maybe change a belief or an idea, which can help the world be a much better place.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we don't even take the time to listen to understand why somebody believes what they do or thinks the way they do. And oftentimes it comes back to something that either happened to them or something that was done that triggered, that belief system or that worldview.
I think I mentioned to you one time, I came back from India about a month ago or two. And, there I was hanging out with a Hindu guy. Yeah. And we were going to Hindu temples and Buddhist temples. We went to a mosque. I'd never been in a mosque before. Yeah. And I don't know if I've ever been in a Hindu temple before. These aren't my belief systems. Yeah. But I was interested. Yeah. I'm learning new stuff. There's no debate. It was just learning and trying to understand other points of view. And I came away from that experience really kind of growing and seeing areas that they were talking about that made sense and gave me a better perspective. And I think we just need more of that that was one of my good examples. I got plenty of bad ones. But, where you just kind of listen to things, very different world, and calm down. In prison, we call it sitting in the fire. Yeah. And you feel like you're on fire because the rage of what you're hearing about can be pretty ugly. Right. But just sitting there and trying to understand, then taking some time, self-care, and then responding by holding your ground, but at the same time in a respectful way where this dialogue can continue.
And I think that's the key. Is you weren't there to try to change their system, or I'm protesting. I'm not walking into your place of worship, as if walking in there is going to change all your beliefs, and people are going to look down on what you believe. Regardless of what you believe, you're hearing them out.
Yeah.
And that helps you to learn from them. But you're standing your ground. If they asked you questions about who you are, what you believe, you're able to share that without it, being this great conflict.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So big topic, conflict resolution. It's just an essential life skill because we're all going to be triggered. We're all going to get that feeling, and we have basically 4 choices how to handle it. And being aware of what those 4 choices, making those decisions in advance, that I'm going to be agreeable where I'm wrong, and where I still want to kind of respectfully push back. We want to be assertive, but at the same time not aggressive, and we sure don't want to hold it in.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of sums it up for me. What do you think?
I think the key word being trigger is figuring out what your triggers are. What are the things? Oftentimes we have cycles of things that we continue to do, and the trigger happens and we respond in one of these ways every time. And if it's in one of these areas, maybe you need to think through, even if you will, role play, or think through like, okay, if this happens, most likely it'll happen again. How can I respond in a healthier way?
I'm glad you mentioned that because when the kids were little, elementary, junior high, and they're kind of growing up, and all my kids went to public schools, basically we would role play. We'd say, okay, we would role play, and someone would go up and, hey, you want to buy some drugs, or and we would actually act it out so that you could, be assertive and say, no, but not, go off and get in fights over things that you disagreed with.
Right.
Yeah, and role playing is a big part of it. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
So Danny Ray, thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. And make sure you like Core IQ, share it, let people know about it so we can keep this conversation going about the core skills we all need in life. See you next time.